Ay, hindi ako kita. Good morning! Isang makakalikasang umaga po sa ating lahat. I am your host, Nika from the Environmental Education and Information Division. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us today in this webinar for the World Environmental Health Day with the title K-Onnect², Kalikasan at Kalusugan para sa Likas-Kayang Kinabukasan with my co-host Jorem. Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Nika, and good morning, everyone. I'm Jorem Rueda, hosting this webinar today. We are so excited to introduce our guest speakers for today and hear their lecture, advocacies, and wisdom about the Environmental Health Day. Again, we are honored and thankful for taking the time to attend this online webinar with us. A kind reminder to everyone to please download and use our official Zoom background for this webinar, which you can find in the chat box.
We'd like to remind everyone to please fill out the attendance sheet now. Link will be provided in the chat box and the communication evaluation form will be posted later at the end of the webinar. Also, for you to be able to get the certificate of attendance, you have to accomplish both forms at the end of the webinar. For the attendance form, we'll only honor those who signed in from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. only.
For the participants in the Zoom, kindly turn off your mic and camera. If you have questions, you may message us through the Q&A tab. And for the participants watching us on Facebook Live, type or message us your questions, comments, and reactions.
So let us now start this webinar by gracing our activity with a prayer followed by the national anthem.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
To officially start our webinar and to welcome us all, let us have the OIC Chief of the EEID and also the Coordinator of the EMBGAD, Ms. Karen Ann Pakpako.
Isang makakalikasang araw po sa ating lahat. Malinaw ba ang dating ko?
Yes po, Ms. K.
Okay. On behalf of the Environmental Management Bureau, I would like to welcome everyone to our webinar entitled K-Onnect², Kalikasan at Kalusugan para sa Likas-Kayang Kinabukasan. To our resource speakers, our participants, and web viewers on Zoom and Facebook Live, I hope all of you are doing well. This webinar is part of our celebration on the 3 environmental events for the month of September. So we have the National Cleanup Month, the World Ozone Protection Day, which took place last September 16, and the World Environmental Health Day on September 26. So allow me to briefly share with you what the concept of environmental health is. We are familiar with environment and health as 2 separate concepts. But what exactly is environmental health all about, and why is it important? Environmental health is the branch of public health that focuses on the relationships between people and their environment. It also refers to the aspects of human health that are determined by physical, chemical, biological, and other factors in the environment. Why is it important? Because the natural environment in which we live in determines our health and well-being. Also because we depend on the environment for energy and the things that we need for our everyday survival. So these are the reasons why the Philippines adopted the celebration of World Environmental Health Day every 26th of September by virtue of Presidential Proclamation number 595, signed last October 1, 2018. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources and the Department of Health, through the Interagency Committee on Environment and Health, are the lead implementing agencies of this celebration. So the theme for this year is Kalikasan at Kalusugan sa Kapaligiran, bida sa pagbabangon ng lipunan. In this webinar, we will know more about the important relationship between environment and health and its important role in the protection and sustaining of our natural resources, especially now that we are continuing to adjust to the new normal and address the challenges of the global COVID-19 pandemic. So I highly encourage everyone to listen and enjoy the discussions. Lahat tayo ay mga tunay na bida sa pangangalaga ng ating kalusugan at kapaligiran. Muli, magandang araw sa inyong lahat at maraming salamat.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kay, for that brief intro and that very warm and welcoming message.
So before we proceed, let us have a quick photo op. Request everyone to please turn on their cameras.
Okay, Secretariat. Please take the photo po. Pa-open na lang po ng cameras. Okay, next tab po. Keep smiling. Next. Okay, next. Next tab po. There you have it. Now it's about time we introduce our first speaker. He is a physician, a professor, and a researcher specializing in local health system development and socio-environmental determinants of health. Over the past 10 years, he's engaged in various public health initiatives that range from research on sustainable supply chains in public health facilities, capacity building for primary care in remote areas, and developmental efforts to establish environmental health research, practice, and advocacy in the Philippines. With that, may we ask everyone to give their full attention and help me welcome Dr. Jameen Luis Apostol, or simply Doc Jello. Doc Jello.
Hello, good morning, Nika and Joren.
Good morning
And
po.
sa lahat po ng mga tagapakinig natin on today's Environmental Health Webinar, isang makakalikasang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Before I begin, I just wanted to make a quick audio check. I just wanted to make sure, are you able to hear me clearly? And are you able to see my slides currently being shared with you right now? Hello, good morning.
Good morning po. Loud and clear po.
All right.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Good
Good
morning,
morning, sir.
sir.
Okay, so actually, World Environmental Health Day was celebrated last September 26, and it has been my personal advocacy, to make sure that we don't only just get to celebrate it for one day, but actually get to live it every day of our lives, especially as Filipinos, no? We are at that part of the earth, nasa bahagi tayo ng mundo kung saan ang kalikasan natin, whatever happens to our environment, is significantly associated with what happens to our health. And with the 40 or 45 minutes that was provided to me for today's webinar, I hope to be able to drive home the point as to why taking care of the planet is important and part and parcel of taking care of the public's health. And in a very special way, I want to be able to impart upon our listeners from DENR today how the work that you do in environmental management, in taking care of the environment, is not only important for the environment, but also important for protecting the health of Filipinos. So are you able to see my slides already? Yes, nakikita naman po, no? Nakikita po ba ng mabuti?
Yes po.
Can I get some virtual confirmation? Okay. So allow me to begin by sharing an inconvenient truth. This is the planetary boundary diagram that was developed by Felix Mueller et al. In 2009. And the planetary boundary diagram is a very good way for us to visualize how certain boundaries in our environmental system, when crossed, can actually result in very harmful and negative consequences to human health. Ang ibig sabihin po nun is, if we reach certain thresholds or if we cross certain thresholds in any of these planetary boundaries or environmental systems, we get to affect negative health significantly. I'd always, when I explain this to my students in med school, I'd always say that the environment is like your boyfriend or girlfriend na mapagtimpe, no? As much as it can, it will try to be patient with all of our abuses, with all of the stresses that we expose the environment to. But there reaches a certain threshold na kapag punong-puno na, sasabog talaga. And like a very angry jowa or like a very angry boyfriend or girlfriend, sometimes when it claps back to you, the consequences can be very detrimental. So there are 9 planetary boundaries, as you can see here. And the planetary boundary here is not the gray line. No? The planetary boundary is the green line. And if you can see here, there are actually certain planetary boundaries that we have already crossed. And there are certain environmental systems that we have already significantly affected up until it has reached a point that we are now experiencing the negative health consequences of crossing these planetary boundaries. So just maybe a bit of audience interaction. Can somebody tell me which are these planetary boundaries that we have already crossed? Anyone would like to maybe just share for the rest of our... It's already posted here as seen in the slides that I'm sharing. Ano po yung tatlong planetary boundaries that we have already crossed and are now experiencing the negative health effects for doing so? Anyone?
biodiversity loss po,
Biodiversity loss is correct, no?
nitrogen cycle and the climate crisis.
Nitrogen cycle and climate crisis. And we are actually also very near in terms of crossing the phosphorus cycle, ocean acidification, and even deforestation and other land use changes. But let me talk about the ones that we have already crossed. When we talk about climate crisis, we are really at the brink of, imploding upon ourselves. No, while we do have this 2 degrees Celsius guardrail approach, we fear that in the next 35 or 50 years or so, we might cross this 2 degrees Celsius guardrail or threshold. And if we are able to cross that, not only do we fear our ice caps melting, not only do we fear a lot of our biodiversity, our plants and animals being lost because of these changes in temperature, but the greatest threat is actually upon us. Crossing that 2 degrees Celsius will mean higher cases of climate-related diseases, which range from everything such as infectious diseases, katulad ng dengue, malaria, and other climate-sensitive infectious diseases, but also heat-related diseases. Ngayon po, napakainit na sa Pilipinas. Over the past few days or past few weeks, I know you've also experienced it, especially if you're here in Metro Manila. And we are bound to experience more and more of these situations. And, it's not just it's uncomfortable, but very much related to a lot of the chronic diseases that are affecting many Filipinos. Nitrogen cycle has been crossed significantly, especially upon the modernization of agriculture, especially with the overuse of fertilizers and pesticides over the past few years, especially as we've tried to, in Filipinos, it's attributed to whatever is happening to the environment. And I think just knowing that, and you, our listeners in DNR, knowing that, in a way, gives the work that you do a special sense of purpose. When you protect the environment, not only are you protecting the environment directly, but you're also helping prevent 1 out of 4 deaths that is Filipinos, right? So, and this is what this diagram, the socio-ecological determinants of health diagram, tells us that, what determines health is not just doctors. What determines, in fact, the contribution, I'll let you in on a secret. I'm a medical doctor. And based on this social determinants of health studies, the health system, which is really the doctors, medicines, and all of these hospital facilities, healthcare facilities, only contribute up to 10 to 15% of health outcomes. But the environment contributes 20 to 25% of health outcomes. So the work that you do as protectors and conservators of the environment, when it comes to protecting public health, is even much bigger than the work that we do as doctors. All right. So I hope I get to drive home that point. And I hope you find in the work that you do a sense of renewed purpose, in such that it's not just for the environment, but also for the people. So another way of understanding the linkage between environment and health is thinking of health as an ecosystem service, a service that is actually provided to us by the environment. And I'm sure you're very much familiar with, this whole concept of ecosystem services. And, I make sure that I get to discuss this concept to health professionals, both medical students and practitioners, because, and even to the public, because, unless we start thinking of the ecosystem, of the environment as providing us a very valuable service, it's very easy for us to take whatever the environment gives us. It's always very easy for us to take that for granted. But seeing it as a service, seeing it something not as an entitlement, but a service that we are actually quite privileged to receive, that in a way encourages us to take care of it more. So the environment, as we all know, provides us a lot of the resources that are essential to human health and to human survival. Everything from food, water, fiber, fuel, and air. But it also provides us regulatory services. A very good example of this would be, a very simple but a very clear and direct example would be our mangrove forests. You know how our mangrove forests act as a certain sponge or sink that protects specifically our coastal communities from storm surges and coastal flooding. Our environment is also very important when it comes to regulating infectious disease. You know, the reason why we're not imploding with so many pandemics, um, even to this day and age, is because nature actually provides its own set of antibiotics that kills all of these potential pandemics that can wipe easily the human population. Nature also provides us cultural and supporting services. Nature has been, the topic and inspiration for a lot of artwork and especially Filipino songs, trademarks and components of our Filipino heritage. But health in particular falls under both provisioning and regulatory. And a very clear example of this is when we talk about the air that we breathe. No, the air that we breathe is essential for human life. The oxygen in particular is very important for our body's metabolic processes. We need it to produce energy. We need it for our different body systems to proceed. So we all learned that in biology, in grade school, and in high school. But have you ever thought of the cost uh, of how much really air is? When you come to think of it, the air that we breathe comes for free. But thinking of it as a service, have you ever really thought of how much air costs, particularly oxygen? And sige, let's just have a bit of a game here. Let's play the prices right now. Every day, the average human person needs around 500 to 600 liters of oxygen necessary for us to sustain life. So if we were put a price tag on that, can anyone please make a guesstimate of if nature was to charge us for the daily amount of air that we were to breathe every day, how much will we be paying nature? Magkano ang ibabayad natin sa kalikasan sa bawat litro or sa total amount of oxygen that we are breathing every day? This is an exercise that I make my students do when I teach ecosystem services for my classes in Ateneo. But I'd like to see whether this is something I can try out with our audience from DENR. How much were we to pay nature if nature was to charge us for the air that we breathe, the air that is essential for human life? Anyone? Can anyone make a guesstimate? Daily rate lang po. Anyone? Hello, isang makakalikasang umaga. Magkano pong ibabayad natin sa kalikasan, sa hangin na hinihinga natin araw-araw? Estimate lang po. Anyone? May gusto po bang magtaas ng kamay? Kung wala po, ay tatawagin po si Stephanie dahil si Stephanie ang nag-invite sa akin dito sa webinar na to. Hello, Stephanie. Are you here with us? Can you make a guesstimate? Stephanie Rojas of EMB? Okay, may iba-iba po, no? So may nagsabi a billion. Medyo mahal naman 'yon, no? Daily rate lang po tayo. 100 pesos, medyo mura. 1K, mura pa rin po 'yon. Si Rove Bilete says 250,000. It's a bit on the upper edge, but yeah. So if we were to pay for nature for the amount of air that we breathe, no, at least in Philippine peso rates, we would be paying around 10,000 to 15,000 pesos per day for the oxygen that we need to breathe, no? Essential for human living. And imagine, so in a year, sabihin natin, sila na po natin sa 10,000 pesos. You multiply that by 365 days, no? That's around 3.6 million or 36 million, but in the range of millions. But that service, that provisioning of air service, essential to human health, is not something that nature is charging to us, no? But because it comes to us for free, it's very easy for us to take that for granted, and it's very easy for us, therefore, to pollute it. But thinking of the true cost of air, makes us think twice when it comes to really conserving and protecting it. And I hope we get to mainstream this whole idea of ecosystem service and payment or costing of ecosystem services, and try to mainstream it, especially to the everyday Filipino, because at least in my experience, this has been a very effective way to encourage people to take the environment more seriously and to appreciate it in a very special and personal way. But nature again, no, nature is not charging us for that, no. We've done a lot of ecosystem services costing. We've done that for, say for example, a kilo of fish, no. Magkano na po ba ang isang kilo ng isda ngayon? Fish is a very important source of protein for for Filipinos. Magkano na po ba ang isang kilo ng isda ngayon? Any guess? 260, so nasa 250 pesos. But the actual cost of nature to produce that same kilo of fish is actually in the range of 3,000 to 5,000 pesos per kilo. No? But we're not paying all of that extra cost. And a lot of what we're getting from nature comes to us for free or at a discount. Okay, so and I hope just knowing that really builds that appreciation for nature. And health is an example of that ecosystem service. Okay, which really now brings me to this whole idea of environmental health. I'm an environmental health practitioner and specialist for the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. And what we do really is to explore these linkages, particularly seeing how the physical, the biological, and even the chemical components of the environment, or pollutants or components that enter the environment, how all of that eventually affects human health. And in practice, what we do is really looking into assessing the level of these contaminants, assessing the level of these physical, chemical, and biological factors, and seeing or making the direct relationship as to how these impact disease outcomes and even mortality outcomes. This is a very important paradigm, no, that we apply in environmental health practice. And really what I'd like to show here is that environmental health is a multidisciplinary approach. And as a multidisciplinary approach, what I'd really like to drive home here is that it's not just the work of DENR, nor is it just the work of DOH, but it's really the concerted effort of multiple agencies, not just the two, no, not just DOH and DENR, different agencies working together, exploring, assessing, and controlling how environmental factors affect the health of populations. So again, no, it's multidisciplinarity. There's an environmental science component. There's a health component, particularly in the realm of toxicology, and more lately, infectious disease studies. And particularly for us, no, what we do here in the Philippines is exposomics, wherein we explore the level of, say, for example, air pollutants that populations are exposed to, the level of contaminants in water that people drink and are exposed to. But really, again, no, I'd like to emphasize by showing this diagram that environmental health is not just the work of one agency, it's not just the work of one sector. It's really the concerted and dynamic effort of different sectors, particularly the environment and health sectors coming together. Okay. So now let's explore more deeply these specific linkages between environment and health. And particularly my specialties is my specialty as an environmental health practitioner is on pollution studies and health, no, particularly air pollution and health. And this is really a diagram that shows how different sources of pollution in air, water, and soil eventually lead to a whole plethora of diseases in different body systems, in the heart, in the lungs, and even in our metabolic systems, causing a whole slew of systemic and metabolic disorders. let's go through. Let's go first with air pollution. We've done a number of air pollution studies here in the Philippines, and believe it or not, but air pollution is the fifth leading global risk factor for premature deaths. As you can see here, these are the top 10 causes of deaths. No, all cause mortality. People can die from eating the wrong food. That's the number one, dietary risks. People can die from high blood pressure, especially for Filipinos. That's number two. People can die from smoking. That's number three. People can die from diabetes, especially high plasma glucose or high blood sugar. And the fifth leading cause of death is air pollution. Okay, now another opportunity for audience participation. What makes air pollution a very unique cause of death? You can die from all of these causes, but air pollution is a very unique cause of death and disease. Why do you think so? Anyone? Meron po bang gusto? Anyone would like to give their 2 cents or so?
Sir,
Yes.
ano po kasi yung air pollution, yung air po kasi na marumi, na-inhale natin tapos pumupunta sa ating respiratory system na maaaring mag-cause ng iba't ibang sakit.
Tama. Sino po yung nagsalita? Can you please introduce yourself?
Leo Willie Bergonyo po.
Okay, so Mr. Willie, tama ba? Leo? Is it Leo or Willie?
Opo.
Yes, no. So Willie is correct, no. So air pollutants enter the human body, but there's also another aspect that makes air pollution a very unique and I'd say a very difficult cause of death to prevent. Anyone? Any additional thoughts? But thank you very much, Leo or Willie, for sharing your thoughts. So you cannot see it. So Giovanni de Guzman is correct. You cannot see it. Medyo malapit na. It's getting warmer. It's getting hot. You can please feel free to unmute your mic. Let's make this interactive. Anyone po? Sige, let's see the chat. It's killing you slowly. Okay. And I think someone already got it. Ria Angela Garina Arroyo. Hello, Ria. I think you got it, no? So sabi ni Ria, it's almost not preventable. And that's true. You can avoid eating unhealthy food. You can avoid, eating salty food that causes high blood pressure. You can avoid smoking. You can avoid eating sugary food. But air pollution is something that you can relatively not avoid. Even if you go indoors, where air pollution is even 3 to 5 times higher than outdoor air pollution, it's almost relatively unavoidable, especially if you're like me, who's living in urban areas. And I know you've met someone na kumakain naman ng tama, nag-exercise naman, clean and healthy living, pero namatay pa rin sa cancer or nagkaroon ng lung cancer. And this really just gives us an idea of the problem that we're dealing with right now, no? And makes it a huge problem at that, no? Parang you can eat healthy, you can live a good lifestyle, but still end up dying or end up having cancer or hypertension because of air pollution. Just because it's relatively unavoidable. It's not as if you walk along EDSA, na kaya po nating piliin kung ano yung hangin na lalanghapin natin. Hindi naman po gano'n yun, di ba? It doesn't work that way. So, which makes it quite important for us to do something about it. And to do something at such a large scale for us to be able to minimize and significantly reduce the amount of air pollution that we are breathing, no? And in a way, I think I'd like to highlight the work that our colleagues in AQMS are doing. No? Napakalaga po ng mga efforts na ginagawa ng ating mga kaibigan sa AQMS when it comes to setting air quality standards, but also encouraging or mainstreaming cleaner sources of fuel to significantly reduce the amount of pollution in the air that we breathe. No? So alam naman po natin to, no? We have different pollutants in the air, from primary pollutants, which later on get transformed by heat or by weather or by climate into secondary pollutants. But when it comes to health, what actually matters is the size, no? Usually when we say size matters, mas maganda po, sinasabi natin mas maganda, mas malaki, di ba? But when it comes to air pollution, mas nakakatakot kapag mas maliit, okay? Particularly, yung mga particulate matter po, or yung mga air pollutants at the size of 2.5 microns or less. Bakit nakakatakot po sila health-wise, no? It's because they're so small that they can actually travel down up to the the ends of your respiratory tree hanggang sa pinakakaduluduluhan po ng ating mga baga or ng ating mga lungs, no? And when it reaches that level, no, some of these pollutants can actually, number one, be absorbed into your human body. Okay? So kung anumang lason ang daladala ng mga air pollutants na to, pwedeng ma-absorb sa katawan at mapunta sa ating dugo at kumalat sa iba't ibang bahagi ng katawan. But more commonly, no, a lot or most of these air pollutants that find their way, especially mga PM 2.5 or lower, a lot of them that find their way into the ends of our respiratory tree, into our alveoli, eventually trigger a series of inflammatory reactions, no? Ito pong mga kumbaga, in a way in COVID, this is also what happens. So this systemic inflammation, you get this from infection, from COVID, but you also get this from, in a very special way, from pollutants that we inhale. And this inflammation can trigger a lot of negative metabolic and systemic processes in the body and can lead to conditions such as stroke, heart disease, and even chronic diseases such as diabetes. No? This is something that we've developed for the Department of Health, no, which really drives home the point of size that size matters when it comes to air pollution. So kung makikita nyo, no, yung po mga mas malalaki na particulate matter, usually sa balat, sa mata, sa upper airway po yan, no, nangangati ang lalamunan. But as it gets smaller, kung napapansin po ninyo, no, yung mga health effects mas nagiging malala, mas nagiging widespread, and it tends to affect more body systems and more body organs, including reproductive problems. Okay? Gusto ko rin pong i-highlight, no, yung epekto ng air pollution sa ating mental health, no. This is something that has been emerging over the past few years. Studies relating air pollution with mental health. There are many different mechanisms for this. Yung isa po doon is yung na-discuss natin kanina, no? Yung mga nalalanghap natin triggering a systemic inflammation, and that systemic inflammation can reach our brain. But in certain instances, some of the pollutants that we inhale or that we breathe in sometimes come directly or interact directly with our brain, especially at this point at the roof of our nose, the cribriform fossa or plate, no, may mga butas-butas po yan, and some of these pollutants can interact with some of the exposed nerves found in that part of our nose, which has a direct connection to our brain, which is why there are more and more studies that are linking air pollution with neurodegenerative problems such as, very commonly, dementia and Alzheimer's, no? So yung laging makakalimutin, more and more we are gaining evidence showing a linkage of air pollution with that. But in the Philippines, no, so we've discussed all of these problems. Tatanungin ko lang po, among all of the diseases that air pollution can cause, ano po sa tingin nyo yung number one na sakit na pinaka naapektuhan ng air pollution? Anyone? Meron po bang gustong mag-guess ulit, no? Ano po? So we've discussed and covered a number of diseases, but what is the number one disease in the Philippines? The number one killer disease in the Philippines that is significantly related to air pollution? Do you have any guess from the audience? Okay, pulmonary. So it's not asthma. Surprisingly, it's not lung cancer. I think Irish Linia Glorioso got it correctly. So Judy Aroy and Irish Linia Glorioso got it correctly. It's actually not disease of the lungs, but air pollution is most significantly associated with heart disease. Okay, so sakit sa puso and stroke, no? 1/4 or even as much as 35% of our stroke and heart disease cases and deaths in the Philippines are in fact linked with air pollution. Okay, we have a number of studies on that here in the Philippines. So definitely air pollution is a very important environmental health problem. Okay, pangalawa is water quality. This one is a bit more localized but an equally important environmental health problem as well. No, mas kayang i-control relative to air pollution. But this is something that we experience both in rural and urban areas. In rural areas, water pollution is an issue of poverty, but in urban areas, water pollution is an issue of growing prosperity, especially as we see more and more of our effluents and more of our wastes being dumped into our water bodies. And we look and when we talk about water pollution hazards that have impact to health, not only do we look at the physical properties of water, but we also look at the chemical and microbial properties of water that can impact health. In fact, one of the things that we are studying right now, and more recently, are high levels of heavy metals in Region 4A. Meron po ba tayong mga high levels of heavy metals in drinking water in Region 4A? Meron po ba tayong representatives ngayon sa Region 4A? Kaway-kaway naman po tayo dyan, no? So that's one issue. Microbial contaminants in water are a very important cause of waterborne diseases or water-related diseases. In fact, the major cause of death in children in developing countries, such as the Philippines, is because of waterborne diseases. So yun po, I hope napapansin nyo po, yung unang point na sinabi ko kanina na yung trabaho po na ginagawa ninyo, kanina yung sa AQMS, ngayon naman sa yung mga kasamahan natin sa DENR na nagtatrabaho sa water quality management. Napakalaki po ng inyong role when it comes to protecting especially our children from dying due to waterborne diseases. Siguro at this point lang po, sige, let's go back to this later on. I'd like to expand our idea of waterborne diseases. For most of our practitioners, napansin ko po, minsan, the focus has always been, when we talk about waterborne infectious diseases, the focus has always been on E. coli. It has always been on fecal-borne diseases, But that's just one example, Yung po yung mga waterborne diseases natin, we do have a wide set of water-related diseases that are affected by the quality and quantity of water. And when we talk about water wash diseases, these are diseases na although hindi natin nakukuha sa tubig, ito po yung mga diseases na kapag wala or kakaunti ang tubig, ay mas dumadami ang incidence or prevalence. Isa po dito ang tinatawag natin na scabies. Ang scabies or yung sa Tagalog tinatawag natin na galis, Ang galis hindi naman nakukuha sa tubig, but we have seen in many areas in the Philippines based from our prevalence studies na in areas where there's very little water and in areas experiencing drought or a shortage of water due to climate change or extreme weather events, dumadami po ang issue ng scabies. Trachoma is another disease. It's the leading infectious cause of disease. It's the leading infectious cause of blindness in the developing world. That's also a water wash disease. We also have water-based and water-related insected vectors. Kasama po dito ang dengue sa ilang bahagi ng Western Visayas and some part of Northern Philippines. Schistosomiasis and filariasis are a problem. And these are water pollution or water-related diseases that I hope we get to expand our focus on. It's not always E. coli, but I hope we are also on the lookout for preventing these diseases by managing the quality of our environmental waters. Especially po yung mga water-based diseases natin, and yung ating mga water wash diseases. A lot of these are not related to drinking water quality. A lot of these are related to the quality of environmental waters. Waters na pinagliliguan, pinaglalabahan, especially ng ating mga Pilipino na nakatira sa mga rural areas, tubig na pinagsasakahan ng ating mga magsasaka. So ito po, pasok po yan sa trabaho ninyo sa DENR, and I hope we are always on the lookout of the health effects of problems in these environmental water sources. Also, when we talk about water, it's not just water quality, but also water quantity. And because of climate change, this is also another issue that we are on the lookout for. And it's an environmental health issue because with less water, mas dumadami po yung mga water-wash diseases natin, mas napapadalas po ang dehydration, mas nahihirapan din po ang mga tao to practice, especially now in the pandemic po, in areas kung saan nagkakaroon ng water shortages, mas dumadami ang COVID-19 cases kasi mas hindi nakakapaghugas ng kamay ang mga tao at hindi sila makapag-practice ng proper hygiene. Okay? So next we go on to waste, so this is a profile or waste generation profile in the Philippines, also from the EMB Solid Waste Management Division. But when we talk about how these different types of wastes eventually impact human health, there are many different ways. Organic waste on the one hand, ito po yung nabubulok, it can either attract bacteria. In itself, it can contain bacteria, but when it decomposes, it can also attract vectors, vermin such as mga daga, insects, flies, mga cockroaches, which further transmit infections to multiple areas. In organic waste, pasok po dyan ating mga solid waste and even yung mga hazardous waste. Hazardous waste in particular, we've been working closely with the team of Sir Jerry of the Haz Waste unit of DNR. Especially now during the pandemic, they're a major environmental health issue kasi especially if hindi po natin na-manage ng maayos itong hazardous waste na to, some of these hazardous waste can contain, especially during this pandemic, infectious virus particles that you can get from infectious waste. Some of these can also contain toxic substances such as mercury, arsenic, cadmium, lead. A lot of these can cause systemic chronic diseases, and for pregnant women, kapag sila po ay na-expose sa mga hazardous substances in these types of waste, these problems can lead to what we call teratogenic problems that can affect the fetus. Okay, pasok din po dito ang mercury, napansin ko po kanina, yung Minamata Convention, and yung Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. These are examples of hazardous waste that are a major environmental health problem and that can cause significant disabling health effects to affected populations and their progeny or their children. E-waste is an emerging problem for us, especially here in the Philippines. We have a very strong semiconductor industry, and especially in light of the growing use of electronics in the country, particularly cheaply made electronics, dumadami na rin po ang ating e-waste na na-generate dito sa Pilipinas. And a lot of these e-waste, when degraded or changed because of environmental or physical factors, they get to release a lot of their hazardous components. Okay, which includes mercury, lead. So mercury po, it can cause a lot of diseases, including Minamata disease, death, reduced fertility, slowed growth, and neurodevelopmental problems. Lead is a very important cause of cognitive problems in children, cadmium as well, PVCs, and other BFRs. Okay, I think our next speaker will talk about microplastics later on. Our generation of microplastics has increased significantly. And now, especially during the pandemics, microplastics can come from our PPEs. A lot of them are made of plastics that, when thrown, especially in our oceans, can be broken down into smaller pieces. But I guess the thing with microplastics is that in itself, they are a health hazard, but microplastics also have a quality of attracting other microbes or infectious pathogens as well as toxic substances. So pwede po silang dumikit sa microplastics, and kapag kinain po yun ng mga yamang dagat at kinain natin yung mga yamang dagat, eventually these can bioaccumulate on us. And I think our next speaker will delve with that or will discuss that more strongly, especially microplastics found in marine environments. But siguro po, gusto ko na rin lang isingit, a significant exposure for humans when it comes to microplastics is not just through seafood. And this is one of the things that we have been researching on at the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health. But it's not just seafood. And you'll be surprised, at least for the general population, what is our more frequent exposure to microplastics in diet? It's not seafood. Does anyone have a guess? Hindi po natin siya nakukuha most. Hindi naman po tayo laging kumakain ng seafood, no? But we've found, though, at least in some of our limited studies, as well as in our ongoing studies, that the most common source of microplastics in human diet or in the Filipino diet is not from seafood. Does anyone want to make a guess? Meron po ba gusto? Well, air is possible. No? Some of these microplastics can be inhaled, especially microplastics, found in fibers, yung mga microfibers po na tinatawag natin. But it's not junk food, not junk food. Anyone po? Going once, going twice. Bibigyan po natin, not noodles. Bibigyan po natin ng jacket, care of EMB, tama ba? Ang nakaguess. Okay, ang sirit po, not fish, no, not seafood, but the most common or malapit na si Mr. Edmar Planas, no? But the most common source of microplastics in the Filipino human diet is actually bottled water. In the number of samples po that we've tested in our center, 80 to 95% of the bottled water that we drink contains significant amounts of microplastics. So, and I hope that knowledge makes you think twice the next time you drink water from a plastic water bottle. And there's this very interesting study in the Philippine setting that shows that newly born infants that were fed milk using water from plastic water bottles were more likely to develop necrotizing enterocolitis, which is yung nabubulok po, no, yung kanilang mga intestines, no. So there are more and more studies there's a growing body of evidence on the effect of microplastics on health, no. It's still not expansive, but at least in the Philippines, we're starting to have we're building up all of these evidence. There's also significant evidence, no, especially nabanggit po natin na dumidikit sa microplastics yung a lot of substances, and sometimes even the microplastic in itself contains these substances called obesogens, substances that can meddle with your metabolic system and can cause problems when it comes to your glucose metabolism, to your fat metabolism. It makes your body store more sugar. It makes your body store more fat. And there's an expansive body of evidence on substances not only in microplastics but even in plastic in itself, no, na kapag nainom po natin or nakain natin can lead to problems in our different metabolic processes. So kaya minsan po, no, nagtataka kayo, nagji-gym naman yung iba sa atin, no, nagda-diet, nagdadasal, pero tumataba pa rin, no? And sometimes maybe it's not for the lack of trying, maybe it's in the plastics that you eat or drink in. Okay, so and there's very strong evidence on these substances in plastic that are related to increase in body fat. Okay, gusto ko rin lang pong i-discuss related to plastic pollution during the COVID-19 pandemic. Major source of plastic pollution during the pandemic is from the PPEs that we use. We've made our own estimates here in the Philippines. We're one of the top producers of plastic healthcare waste in Southeast Asia, notwithstanding the fact that we also have the one of the worst COVID-19 pandemic in the region. So we make use of a lot of these plastics for PPEs, but also, you know, in our deliveries in Lazada and in Shopee. So talagang tumaas po ang ating plastic waste generation during the pandemic. And again, no, these plastic waste, as discussed, have very significant health effects. So just to summarize, no, the effect of waste on health, it can lead to infections, especially when we talk about hazardous waste and infectious waste that attach to plastic components and even microplastics. It can lead to acute poisoning, especially when we talk about hazardous waste. It can lead to physical injury, especially when we talk about healthcare waste, especially mga sharps. And it can lead to chronic disease, especially when we talk about the different substances or obesogens and metabolic retardants that are found in plastic wastes, no? And it can also affect mental health, no? Tama nga naman si Maricel Soriano, no? You know, when we are exposed to so much waste, it's not good for our mental health. It affects our mood. It affects our outlook in life. And that may have short to medium term implications on our mental health. So we've discussed this, solid waste and infectious diseases. So that's environmental pollution for you and how it impacts human health. We've discussed how air pollution, water pollution, and even solid waste pollution has affected health. The next one I'd like to discuss is biodiversity. So I know we do have some listeners here from the Biodiversity Management Bureau, and we've mentioned earlier how biodiversity is a very important source of health provisioning ecosystem services. Now, we do get a lot of our medicines, especially life-saving drugs for cancer, for Alzheimer's, for problems of the heart from nature, both from plants and animals. Most of our anesthetics, most of our the drugs that we use for pain are actually from our research in marine organisms, especially sharks and bears as well, no? And even natural products, so the products that we use, pampaganda, pampagwapo, we all get that from nature. And biodiversity, no, if biodiversity is threatened, then we lose access to this, we lose access to the potential in terms of biomedical discovery that this biodiversity affords us. Another very important provisioning service that we get from nature is actually the food that we eat, no? And this is where we'll also bring in climate change. Climate change has affected the environment of our food systems and has affected the security of the food that we eat. But dito rin papasok ang ating mga unsustainable na environmentally unsustainable agricultural health practices, especially our overuse of pesticides. We've seen in a lot of our farming communities very high cases of skin diseases, no? Especially po yung mga farming communities na gumagamit ng aerial spraying, for example, or even spray-based pesticides without adequate PPE. A lot of these cling to their skin and they can develop allergies in the short term, but eventually even cancer and other chronic skin diseases in the long term. We've talked about earlier how the overuse of fertilizers eventually pollute our marine bodies and eventually affect the marine resources that we ingest as humans. But what I'd like to highlight in a very special way, and something that has not been discussed or has been overlooked over the many years, is how our overuse of pesticides and fertilizers have decreased the amount of vitamins and minerals or the overall nutrition that we get from food. Believe it or not, compared to 50 years ago, the amount of vitamin C that we get from fruits and vegetables has decreased by 20%. The amount of iron that we get from food has decreased by 15%, vitamin B2 by as much as 38%, and calcium by as much as 16%. And what is the reason for all of this? A lot of the evidence shows that this decreasing amount of vitamins and minerals from food, the decreasing nutritional quality of food, may be directly linked to our overuse of pesticides and fertilizers, especially in areas where there's overly intensive and overly modernized agriculture. It has been seen in a lot of experiments how pesticide-treated plants actually produce less phytochemicals. And these phytochemicals are what helps plants fight off all of these pests. Now, kung meron ka ng pesticide, there's less impetus for the plants to produce these phytochemicals. And it's these phytochemicals that actually become the vitamins and minerals that we get from plants. Okay? So I think this is worth looking into, and that's, I guess, it's not just an environmental health problem, but something that we can work more closely with the Department of Agriculture when we talk about not just the security, but the quality of our food and the food of the future. Climate change is also a very important issue, an important environmental health issue, because climate change stands to threaten, the amount of food and the quality of food that we can produce for us in the now and for the next generation. Kapag masyadong mainit, our farmers are unable to produce enough food. Same goes if we experience more and more extreme weather events. We encounter more food wastage during extreme heat. So that's another food security and food safety problem. Mas maraming nabubulok, mas maraming cases ng food poisoning. Climate change has also been linked with decreasing amount of zinc found in our plants, in our root crops. So again, it's not just pesticides and fertilizers, but also climate change affecting the amount of zinc found in our food. And I guess also in relation to biodiversity and environmental change, the spread of infectious diseases in the past 100 years has been linked with us threatening biodiversity. A lot of the pandemics from Ebola to avian flu to even the COVID-19 pandemic that we are experiencing right now have its roots to our inability to protect wildlife, our inability to prevent and control illegal wildlife trade and poaching, but also in a very special way as we deforest and convert many of our forests into human settlements. This is what we call the urban sprawl. The more interaction that we get with forest systems, the more likely that human populations get to transmit or are able to be exposed to what we call zoonotic infections. Yung po mga viruses na nasa mga hayop talaga, pero dahil nag-i-interact po tayo sa mga hayop na ito, ay napipick up natin itong mga infections na to, In a way, that's what the COVID-19 pandemic story tells us. And I guess my key takeaway here is that, in the root of it all, this COVID-19 pandemic is not just a public health issue. Before it even became a public health issue, it was an environmental issue. It was a biodiversity management issue. It was an issue about being able to control illegal poaching and illegal wildlife trade. And I guess that gives an idea how you as environmental practitioners do have a very important role when it comes to preventing pandemics such as these from happening again or from re-emerging again in the future. Because again, like what I tell you, 60 to 70% of the infectious diseases or that become pandemics that will happen in the next decades will be environmental in nature. Okay, and our first line of defense will really be you, our environmental managers, our forest rangers, who are making sure or who are trying as best as they can to put a stop to this wildlife trade. Okay, nature is also a very important source. Napag-usapan po natin kanina, what we've been discussing is physical health, but mental health is also very much affected by nature. We do have this global, I guess, practice standard of 9 square meter exposure to green space per day. There are many different variations of this standard. May mga iba nagsasabi na at least 30 minutes to 90 minutes exposure to green space per day to ensure that you have good mental health or that you get prevent excessive stress, depression, or anxiety. In the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health, We're starting to map out the correlation of green space with levels of anxiety, depression, and stress in Metro Manila. And, slowly we're seeing some significant relationships po, yung mga areas in Pasig, for example, in Pasig City, na covered in significant greenery, they have less rates of stress, anxiety, and depression. So more and more, we are gaining evidence as to how nature is actually good for our mental health. Okay? So climate change and health, there's so much that can be said about this. So climate change can directly affect health, especially when we talk about extreme weather events causing accidents, causing disability, and even death. Extreme heat causing heat strokes or heat-related diseases. Ito po ang iba't ibang diseases that are affected by or that are caused by changes in climate, no? Pasok din po dito ang mga allergies, respiratory diseases such as asthma and COPD, cardiovascular diseases, mas tumataas po ang sakit sa puso kapag nag-iinit. But the biggest health problem when it comes to climate change would be the expected increase in mosquito-borne diseases or vector-borne diseases as a result of changing climate. And the pathophysiology here is a bit complicated. No, there are many different factors, but to simplify for you, this is the usual life cycle of a mosquito. So nagsisimula po yan sa itlog, and then magiging kiti-kiti, and then 1/3 or less than 1/3 of its life, it's a mosquito. And as a mosquito, dun po siya nagtatransmit ng iba't ibang sakit kamukha ng dengue at malaria. Okay? Now, when these mosquitoes are exposed to warmer temperatures, mas napapansin ho ninyo, no, yung mga itlog, mas mabilis maging kitikite, at yung mga kitikite, mas mabilis maging lamok. At dahil mas mabilis sila maging lamok, mas humahaba yung or hindi naman humahaba yung lifespan, or mas matagal yung oras na nagiging that the vector spends as a mosquito. At dahil doon, mas marami siyang opportunity na mangagat. Lagi ko nga sinasabi, especially when we talk to communities, habang mas mainit, mas nangangagat. Hindi lang po yun sa tao, pero ganun din ho yun sa mga lamok, no? And this is a very simple visualization that shows you that provides direct evidence how climate change is actually very much related to the projected increase of mosquito-borne diseases such as dengue and malaria. Okay, so I'm down to my last few slides now, and we've gone through the different specific linkages between the environment and health, and I hope I was able to provide significant examples or share significant examples as to how the work that you do in the environmental sector is super important for us in the health sector. In fact, how it's even bigger than whatever I as a medical doctor can do when it comes to protecting public health. Tama nga naman po si Joey Ayala sa kanta niya nang sinabi niya na ang lahat ng bagay ay magkakaugnay. And that's really the One Health approach, no, or in Filipino. And I hope we can mainstream this, no. We can mainstream this whole concept of Kalusugan. This whole idea that, kung ating aalagaan ang kalikasan, atin ding inaalagaan ating kalusugan. At ang kalusugan ng ating kalikasan ay kalusugan din ng ating mga mamamayan. So, really, kalikasan is no different from kalusugan because kalikasan and kalusugan may be one and the same. Alright? So yun po ang konsepto ng kalusugan, and I hope, and I'd like to think that this is the local translation po of this whole practice of environmental health. Okay? And now, there are many things that you can do, no? Aside from the very important work that you do bilang mga kawani ng ating can do, your knowledge of what you can do goes beyond whatever in what I'm sharing to you. But what I'd like to highlight, something that you can do, no, immediately, and something concrete and something impactful that you can do is to shift to our more environmental health, or what we'd call a planetary health diet. Meron po tayong tinatawag na food pyramid, no? Which tells us the amount of food that we should be eating based on nutritional value. But the planetary health diet also tells us the environmental value of food. So dito po makikita natin that yung mga red meat talaga have such high negative environmental impact, and that we really should be eating more fruits and vegetables, as well as breads and whole grains, because they have lower environmental impact. No? Ito po yung tinatawag natin na planetary health diet, and I'll be sharing my slides to EMB. Feel free to screenshot this. I hope we have more opportunity to discuss this in greater detail, but this is what an environmentally healthy diet looks like. Something that is not only nutritional, something that is not only good for the body, but also good for the environment. Okay, there are very specific guidelines on the planetary health diet, but what I'd like to share is that this planetary health diet is evidence-based. It's not like all of these fad diets that we encounter. There are lots of studies over the past 10 years that shows that shifting to this planetary health diet does not only lead to lower rates of heart disease, stroke, cancer, and diabetes, but it also leads to lower carbon dioxide emission to prevent or mitigate climate change, can lead to better conservation of water, is better at conserving land use change, and has an overall lower environmental impact than our current or usual diet. So evidence-based po yan, and it's something that you definitely can do, something that you can do at a personal level, and something that you can do even after this webinar. The other thing po that I'd like to personally advocate is for everyone to start mainstreaming and adapting reusable cloth masks. It's not from me, it's from the World Health Organization, wherein the WHO na po mismo ang nagsabi that for the general public, it is safe for the general public to wear reusable masks in specific situations and settings. It's effective. You don't need to be wearing medical grade masks, because a lot of these medical grade masks will take, you'll only end up using them 1 or 2 or 3 days, but it will take 100 to 400 years for them to disintegrate. But if you are using a cloth mask, and especially if magdo-double mask pa kayo ng cloth masks, no? So that's already affords you significant protection, especially if, say for example, if you're going to the grocery or if you're just walking outside, no? Okay na po yung cloth mask. Hindi naman po kailangan na araw-araw. So there are only special situations kung saan warranted ang ating paggamit ng mga medical grade masks. So sana maging mindful po tayo, and I hope we get to mainstream and encourage the use of reusable fabric or cloth masks, because not only are they effective when it comes to public health wise, but also they're also environmentally friendly. There are many disinfection options. This is a very simple solution for disinfection. And yeah, so 2 things that you can definitely do: start on a healthier diet and use more environmentally friendly masks. Things that you can do not only today as we celebrate Environmental Health Day, but something that you can live up, no, for the rest of the pandemic and for the rest of your life. I'd like to end my presentation with a quote from my son's one of my son's favorite children's books. It's the Lorax, where it says, "Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better." No, it's not. So that's all. I hope that we get to continue to protect the health of the environment, and in doing so, I hope we find it in our hearts that we are protecting the health of its people as well. Yun lamang po, isang makakalikasang umaga muli sa inyong lahat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Doc Jello. We really appreciate your insights and for sharing your knowledge about the environmental health. We hope that everyone had an enjoyable learning experience listening from the talk. Now we will answer some questions that were sent to us during the presentation. So the first question is from Alvaro. His question is, how about sa refilling station ng water using gallon? Meron din ba yung microplastic kahit madalas na re-refill?
Yes po, no. Very important po. Paano po for what plastic containers? Usually po, microplastics, ang nangyayari po is kapag luma na yung mga plastic containers, minsan nasa-shave off po, no? Yung mga microfibers, mga microplastic components, nasa-shave off po dun sa inner environment or dun sa inner surface ng ating mga plastic containers. So, very important po, no? Kadalasan naman kasi yung mga ginagamit na, especially yung mga matitigas na plastics ng mga water refilling stations, hindi naman po sila mabilis ma-shave off. Pero like say for example po, yung mga plastic water bottles kasi, no, yung most common source of microplastic is every time na ating pinipihit yung yung takip. So may mga small components po na shave off na pupunta dun sa tubig na iniinom natin. Yung mga mas maninipis na plastics, gaya ng ganun nga, yung mga ginagamit sa ating mga plastic water bottles, mga ginagamit sa microwavables. So, ganun po, yun po yung isang paraan kung paano napupunta yung mga microplastics sa pagkain na kinakain natin o sa tubig na iniinom natin. So, very important po sa ating mga water service providers na i-inspect yung integrity ng ating mga water containers, kung sila ba ay ayos pa, kung masyado na silang matagal, baka kailangan ng palitan, kasi baka nga na-shave off na at na-introduce na ang microplastics sa mga tubig na iniinom.
Okay, another question po, Doc. How about the newborn children using the alkaline water? May effect din daw po ba?
Sige po, yung alkaline water, hindi ko po muna sasagutin yan kasi medyo mixed po yung evidence natin dyan. No? Pero dito po sa Pilipinas, no, gaya nga po na nabanggit ko kanina, we do have a couple of case studies in the Philippine setting, some from the Philippine General Hospital. Alam niyo po yung laging sinasabi ng pagbata, kapag bagong panganak na bata, dapat ang iniinom na tubig ay galing sa Wilkins. Again, hindi po ako anti-Wilkins or hindi po ako, I do not endorse any water brand. No? Pero yung tendency po kasi ng mga nanay is dapat pag bagong panganak na bata, dapat yung tubig na pinapainom is galing sa plastic water, sa bottled water. In the Philippines po, one of the risk factors that we found for increasing incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis, yun po yung isang sitwasyon kung saan nabubulok yung intestines ng bata is because from frequent use of this bottled water. Okay, so we do have some evidence for that, no? Aaminin ko po, no, hindi pa po talaga malawak ang evidence ng microplastics on health. But we are slowly seeing some, kasi for us to be able to conclusively say, we need thousands of those kinds of evidence, no? For us to conclusively make those connections. But right now, we are starting to document these cases, no, in the Philippines, in Southeast Asia, and elsewhere around the world. And I hope maybe our next speaker can expound more on that. But we do have evidence here in the Philippines. So gusto ko lang pong i-debunk yung notion nga, especially sa ating mga nanay, na drinking or making our infants drink or anybody drink from plastic or bottled water is safer. It's not always the case, especially when we talk about microplastics.
So meron pa pong isang question. How does prion affects our health since almost all offices use aircon?
Hello, pwede pong pakiulit? Effects of what po?
How does prion affects our health since almost all offices are using aircons?
Yes po, no. And in fact, freon is a very important hazardous substance kasi often it's tasteless and odorless. And freon exposure can irritate your lungs if it is inhaled. It can burn your esophagus, no, and can cause irritation of the stomach. When exposed sa skin, pwedeng masunog or pwedeng magkaroon ng skin necrosis or tissue damage. But most of our freon exposure, yung pinakamalala talaga sa ospital, lung failure and even death, no? Pag medyo kaunti naman, so yun nga, parang nagkakaroon ng pananakit ng tiyan, nagsusuka. But significant exposure to freon can lead to lung failure or even death, especially when inhaled or ingested.
Okay. Another question from Giovanni de Guzman po. You discussed about microplastics. How about yung probiotic drinks or milk tea containers? Are they also included as a millennial we need to be aware of?
So are you asking po about microplastics dun sa mga container ng mga probiotics? Yeah, especially if we reuse, no? Alam ko po yung iba sa atin mahilig tayo mag-reuse sa mga containers ng mga plastic bottles na ito, no? Or plastic drinking containers na ito. A lot of these plastic drinking containers were actually designed for single use. And the reason for that is if you keep on reusing them, there's greater tendency nga po na yung inner surface will be shaved off to generate or introduce microplastics. Okay? So depende rin po talaga yan sa type of plastic. May mga numbers po tayo nakikita, no, sa ilalim ng ating mga plastic containers. So the kind of plastic will also help us determine whether that plastic container is safe for reuse or not. Kasi kung hindi siya safe for reuse, yun po yung mga mas likely na pwede mag-introduce ng microplastics kapag ginamit ulit.
Okay. May isa pa pong humaful for the question. So, unsafe din po ang plastic labo na ginagamit sa kalsada sa mga kainan?
Ano po yung plastic labo? Yung pinaglalagyan ng ulam, no?
Opo.
Yes, parang, especially if nire-reuse po natin yan, no? So, yun nga po, nabanggit nga po natin, no? Kapag single use, less likely po for plastics to produce microplastics and even for plastics to start releasing into the food or into the water yung mga metabolic retardants natin or xenobiotics or obesogens sa tinatawag natin. Pero kapag nire-reuse po natin yan, no, more likely po na pwede po siyang mag-release ng microplastics and even yung mga obesogens na tinatawag natin, these toxic substances that harm your metabolic processes.
May isa pong question.
So, yeah, kaya importante po yung mga BPA-free plastics, no? Kasi especially BPA is one of those substances na kino-consider natin na metabolic retardants because when ingested, no, it can affect our metabolic processes, can lead to a slew of problems such as diabetes, heart disease, obesity as well, no? So kaya especially for kunwari para po sa mga feeding bottles ng ating mga anak, mas maganda po, or even for the plastic wares that we use or reuse in our day-to-day lives, maganda po na piliin natin yung mga BPA free.
So yan po, meron pa po isang question from Ria Angela Jarino Arroyo. So is it true po that white plastics, may it be plastic bottles or plastic cellophanes, is safer than those colored ones?
Wala po yan sa kulay. Nasa quality po yan ng plastic. Okay, so it's not in the color, it's in the quality of the plastic. Again, no, we need to take heed of the numbers or the kind of plastic that was used and know kung ano ba ang tamang gamit at kung pwede bang gamitin ulit yung plastic container na iyon.
Okay. Ayun, may question pong humabol. May humabol. Okay, last question na po talaga, Doc. Sorry. How can you convince people to shift into using sustainable alternatives?
Well, I think no. The best way to convince is always through example. Okay. If we set a good example as health practitioners, as you environmental authorities, I think that's definitely one way by which we can encourage and mainstream environmentally sustainable practices. But I think no, we need to also maximize and optimize the power that you have as authorities at the national and regional level. We can use policy, we can use guidelines to make or help enable people to adopt a more environmentally sustainable lifestyle. One way for this is to encourage more LGUs to implement a ban on single-use plastics, diba? Or to maybe at the level of DNR finally include single-use plastics as part of our NIAP. Malaking bagay po na gamitin as leverage ang policy because it makes it easier for the everyday Filipinos to adopt these environmentally sustainable practices. At the level of the DOH, one of the things that we've always commented on is kung mapapansin nyo po, no, maybe even in some of you, yung po mga promo materials for COVID, makikita nyo po yung mga tao ang ginagamit ay medical grade mask. When in fact, di ba, sabi nga natin, it is safe and more environmentally friendly for people to be using cloth and fabric masks. Kaya na-appreciate ko po si Nika kasi I think si Nika Barcenas is wearing a cloth. Is that a cloth or fabric mask?
Fabric po.
So that's reusable. So if you're in the office, diba, if you're not in the hospital setting, then there's really no reason for you to be using a medical grade mask that you will only end up using for 2 or 3 days, or maybe even just 1 day. So, and you know, the kind of policies that we release, the kind of materials and guidelines that we espouse and promote to the general public do have a significant influence as to how the everyday Filipino can live out environmentally sustainable lives. So, yes, we can set out a good example, but at your level as policymakers, you can use policy guidelines and programming to make it easier for the Filipinos to adopt a more environmentally sustainable lifestyle.
Okay. Thank you again, Doc Jello, for answering all those questions and for the great presentation. At this point, we would like to virtually present to you our certificate of recognition. Okay, this certificate of recognition is presented to Dr. Janine Luis Apostol for sharing his expertise in the webinar K-Onnect² Kalikasan at Kalusugan para sa Likas-Kayang Kinabukasan in celebration of the World Environmental Health Day and Trust of the Bureau, given this 28th of September 2021. Signed by the OIC Chief and the OIC Chief of EMD, EEID, Ms. Karen Anpakpako, and Assistant Director of the Environmental Management Bureau, Engineer Vesminda A. Osorio.
Maraming salamat po and thank you for this invitation. And sana
Thank you
po
po.
ay huwag kayong mag-atubili to reach out to us in the health sector. We are more than happy to interface with you. We have an interagency committee on environmental health, and I hope we get to explore more these linkages on how we can work together to protect the health of the planet and to protect the health of its people. Again, maraming salamat po sa pagkakataon na ito. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you po. And now we can call on our second speaker, who is a science research specialist in the Coastal Resources and Ecotourism Research, Development and Extension Center, Ecosystem Research and Development Bureau. He implemented 2 research studies entitled Result-Based Assessment of Rehabilitated Disaster affected by mangrove, and beach forest areas and microplastic contamination, determination on selected major water bodies of the Philippines. Let us all welcome Mr. John Alfonso Horbidalia.
Hello, good morning everyone. Good morning sa
Good
mga
morning
kapitbahay
po.
ko dyan sa END, no, and to all the participants.
morning
Naririnig
po.
ako?
Yes po.
Wait lang. Let me share my screen. Okay. So, thank you very much, Doc Gel, for that presentation kanina. And it's good to know that there are studies now na pinipush through dealing with microplastics and effects human health and the health per se, because actually yan yung isa sa mga pinaka major na knowledge gap when it comes to microplastic studies, kasi napaka-limited ng mga literatures and studies that has been conducted dealing with microplastics, especially yung effects niya sa human health. So actually kami nga, yan din yung problema namin. And even standardized methods in sampling of microplastics is hindi pa rin established up to until now, even in the international level. So for today now, I was tasked to present to you the microplastics in environmental health, but I'll be focusing more on microplastics and its impact on marine wildlife, based on literatures and based na din dun sa studies on the study that we have conducted. So I'm John, I'm a SRS2 from ERDB. We are, for those of you na don't know what ERDB is, we are the research bureau or the main research arm of the DENR. Okay, so let me first show you this clip. Actually, this is a video. This is a screen snap of a video that I've taken during one of our dives in Canyon Strait, affected seascape in Cebu. As you can see, there's a massive group of corals and maraming isda. Rich in biodiversity kasi nga protected seascape in Canyon. However, when I was taking this video, something in the horizon appeared. Pumasok siya sa frame ng camera ko. And it's going towards me as I was doing my safety stop. And doon ko na-realize that it is a piece of plastic bag. So it's so ironic that we can see this kind of scenario, or we can see a sando plastic bag. Fresh pa po yan, wala pa pong, it's not yet biofouled pa. Malinis pa siya, freshly thrown away siguro. Kinuha namin dyan at pinago. So it's so ironic now that this protected area, like Canyon Strait, you can see it's a sando plastic bag sa napakagandang coral reef area. So this piece of plastic bag that we saw is actually just a part of the global rising problem when it comes to marine plastic pollution. Because sabi nga nila, there are more than 40 million tons now of plastics that are being used and discarded. And on this, there are all plastics na natatapon from ferrying ships, boats. And not only sa dagat, but also sa beaches. Meron na rin tayong makikita, especially sa beaches that are high tourist activities. And sadly, these garbage patches are being formed sa mga major oceans natin sa buong mundo, like Pacific Ocean, like the Atlantic Ocean. Because, like for example, now, like the case of the Pacific Ocean, there are a lot of currents that meets in the Pacific, and these currents form what we call gyres, na parang umiikot lang yung tubig doon. So, kasi sasalubong yung mga currents, umiikot siya, and it forms gyres, and within these gyres, garbage coming from sabihin na natin all around the world meets through these different currents, meets in this gyre and forms a garbage patch. And yun yung tinatawag natin Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So sadly, Philippines is in the top 3 countries which contributes to marine plastic debris. They are next to Indonesia and top 1 is China. And 83% of this waste are mismanaged, and they're contributing around 1.8 million metric tons of mismanaged plastic waste that are being thrown in the ocean. And this is based on the data by Jambet, which was published in Spheres and Influence in 2015. This plastic pollution in our oceans not only affects our marine wildlife and only us humans, especially yung marine wildlife natin, because they are eating plastics na. Siguro you can already see reports, necropsy reports that dead turtles and whales found in our shore, merong mga plastics sa tiyan nila kasi nakakain nila. And this was highly documented also by Abreu, Abreu at ni Cuenca, dun sa Davao, that there are a lot of marine turtles found washed ashore and necropsy analysis as plastics in their stomach. Plastics and marine wildlife that can eat plastics, no, they can decrease the metabolism nila, decrease in blood glucose levels nila, and eventually it leads to the death of the animal. So plastics in our ocean is just the tip of the iceberg, because yun yung sabi kanina, we have a much more threatening enemy, yung tinatawag natin microplastics, which are microscopic plastics, pieces of plastics na nakikita natin sa marine sediments natin and in the water column, and especially sa mga open oceans natin. Their size ranges around 20 to 5,000 micrometers. So to put that into perspective, the biggest microplastic would be 5,000 micrometers, and that's half a centimeter in size. Yan. So parang half a centimeter na, so makikita mo na siya. Pero yung pinakamalaki. Yung pinakamaliit will be 20 and much more lesser pa. Mas maliit pa sa brain exam. We will need a microscope. See them. And these microplastics, ano yung sabi ni Doc kanina, they are being produced or through the deterioration of larger plastic materials, like, for example na lang, plastic bottle natin. They are, sample natin yung kay Doc, na yung plastic bottle, yung mineral water bottle, they are being exposed to UV radiation, and this causes them to deteriorate. So, tumiinit siya. That's why don't ever buy plastic water bottles na exposed sa init. Ayan. Kasi yan nga, nasi-shed off yung loob and na-deteriorate siya. Microplastics are being produced and mixed dun sa drink sa loob. Same din sa microplastics dun sa dagat. You can see a plastic water bottle floating in the ocean. They are being exposed to salinity, ocean currents, pressure, UV radiation, and other environmental elements. They are being deteriorated. And later on, they became microplastics. They are not being deteriorated na nawawala na sila. Pero they are producing microplastics. Okay, so what we did as an overview na lang of what we did in documenting the microplastics here in the Philippines is that we sampled 10 water bodies. So just to give you an idea, we gathered water samples from Subic Bay, Manila Bay, Apo Island in Mindoro. We have Lamon Bay in Quezon. We also sampled water Boracay, Tanyon Strait, affected seascape in Cebu. We have Tacloban Island, National Marine Reserve in Guimaras. We also gathered water samples from Davao Gulf near Samal Island, Butuan, and Iligan Bay. So that's 10 water bodies na kinuhanan namin. So we gathered water samples from in the beach area and in the nearshore area, 1.5 kilometers from the shoreline and 3 kilometers, as far as 3 kilometers, and at the maximum depth of 30 meters. These water samples that we have gathered, we filtered and microscopically analyzed in order for us to determine the presence of microplastics. Okay. So in the interest of the study, we classified microplastics into 5. So what are these microplastics that we have found in these 10 areas all over the Philippines? First, we have microfibers. So these are actual photos of the microplastics that we found during the conduct of the study. So we have microfibers. Microfibers, yan yung sinasabi ni Doc kanina, na coming from the washing of clothes, yung sa masks, yan, yung masks natin, surgical masks, they are sources of microfibers because once you throw it and mapunta sa dagat, they are being deteriorated, napupudpud siya. So pero parang may himulmol, that's the main source of microfibers. One source of microfibers also are yung ropes, yung fishing nets na ginagamit sa mga fishermen natin. And if you can see, if nakakapunta kayo ng mga beach, you can see ropes, diba? And then there are buoys, ropes that delineate the boundaries ng dagat for safety purposes. Yan, they are sources of microfibers. Isa pa is yung damit, malalamhan natin, and yung nilabhan, yung tubig, you throw it. Yeah, there are a lot of microfibers in there. So dito nakikita nyo, meron tayong reddish microfiber. And there's a calibration here. It's 1,000 microns. So this is like around 4,000 microns. The transparent microfibers. Clear na clear that these are not natural in our water samples. Next, we have microfragments. Okay, ito yung one of the main source of microfragments or yung sa PET bottles natin, yung sa mga mineral water bottles and other plastic items like storage box, yung mga anything mga furniture natin. Yeah. So let's just focus dun sa pag-uwiyar, yung plastic spoons, ayan. So sa plastic bottles. So plastic bottles floating in the ocean, they deteriorated, they are producing what we call microfragments. And so microfragments, we have microfilms, this film like plastic particles like this one, and dito, this bluish fragment here. Ayan, so anything that are made of plastics, like utensils, disposable utensils, face shields. Yeah, face shields, they are sources also of microfragments once na nag-deteriorate sila, especially sa data. Okay. Next are microbeads. Okay. Microbeads, one of the most primary source of microbeads are cosmetic products natin. Toothpastes, facial scrubs, facial wash. Ayan. So, you use a facial scrub yung parang may magaspang, especially yung toothpaste din, yung parang may magaspang. These are sources of microbeads. But good to know now that there are already movements now that they are banning the use of microbeads in these stocks. Pero one of the major sources also, aside from cosmetic products, are yung sa mga sandblasting facilities natin. Yung mga naglilinis ng ilalim ng barko, yung boat hulls, yung sa mga dry dock areas natin. Yan, nagsa-sandblast sila, natatapon, minsan may spillage. These are sources also of microbeads. Kasi yung ginagamit mismo sa sandblasting nila are also microbeads. Yeah, so next we have nerdles. Ito yung pinakakakonte na kita namin. Ito, meron kayong dito yung transparent reddish na hindi ko alam kung ano yung shape. Pero parang jelly-like. Pero ano siya, nerdles actually are what we call the retaso. These are the raw materials in the production of other plastic materials. So sources of this actually are yung mga spillage sa mga shipping containers natin. Yan, natatapon sila during shipping, minsan during the production, natatapon, may introduce sa waterways natin, and ending up in our oceans. Lastly, yung microfoams. Microfoams, foams, styrofoams. Yan, so major source of this styrofoams, especially sa food packaging natin. Ito yung puti-puti, bilog-bilog. Also, yung mga buoys na lumulutang sa dagat. Yan see sa mga beach, merong buoy, there's a rope na kumonect sa mga buoys na yan. And these styro buoys are sources of microfoams because exposed sila sa labas, exposed sila sa elements, they are being deteriorated. So nakita nyo na minsan yan, kalahati na lang. So isa na pa yung kalahati. So these are sources of microfoams. So meron silang rope, and that rope will be the source of microfibers. So double kill. Meron tayong microfoam, meron tayong microfibers. Happy microplastics. Okay. So what are the impacts of these microplastics sa ating environment, sa ating biodiversity? First, several studies showed that corals exposed to microplastics has lower calcification rate. And microplastics are also found in sa reef sediments, kung saan yung corals natin. So ano ngayon kung mababa yung calcification rate ng corals natin? This makes our coral reefs brittle. Hindi na sila makasupport. Konting malakas na current na lang mapuputol na yung corals natin. Also, due to low calcification rate ng corals, mas mahina or mas lower yung reef building na tinatawag natin. So yung regeneration ng coral reefs is mas mababa compared dun sa coral reefs na hindi exposed sa microplastics. Also, this increases the stress rates in corals. Kasi nga, stress na ngayon corals natin due to climate change, global warming, raising atmospheric temperature, raising sea surface temperature, raising sea temperature, and ocean acidification. Dagdag mo pa yung microplastic na i-ingest nila. Kasi nga, microplastics are being ingested by our filter feeders, especially our corals. Kasi pinifilter lang nila yung tubig, labas yung tubig, papasok na yung microplastic sa system nila. So this amplifies the exposure of coral reefs to stressor, and this leads to coral bleaching and eventually death. And this is highly critical now because coral reefs is our main building block, our foundation for our marine ecosystem to survive. Because dyan nakadepend yung fishes natin, yung marine biodiversity natin. So yung walang corals, walang coral reef, wala tayong nursing station for our fishes, especially sa mga bentopelagic fishes natin, mga commercially fished na mga isda. Next is that microplastics are also found sa muscular tissues ng bivalves and mga mollusks natin, especially sa mga crabs, shrimp. Yeah. So a study was conducted also in Bacoor Bay by Albanino and Hananiro. I think they're from Lasal. That shows microplastics ng Asian green mussels or yung green shell. And just to give you an idea, the result that we have, in our 10 study sites, the average density for microplastics is 23 microplastic particles per liter. So, assuming that bivalves like mollusks, talaba, basic biology will tell you that they filter around 2 liters of ocean water per hour. So every hour, 2 liters yung hinahilot na. And based on the study, we have 23 liters. So sa isang oras, yung isang mollusk, yung isang green shell, filter niya is 2 liters. So that's 23 times 2. That's roughly around more or less 56 pieces of microplastics yung na-filter niya sa isang oras. So siya, hindi naman lahat na-retain. Yung iba siguro sumasama din palagpas. Pero more or less, we have 56 pieces of microplastics if they are filtering 2 liters of ocean water per hour. Yeah, so kakain din naman natin sila. And actually, hindi maganda because it's an interesting study to delve with yung effects naman ng microplastics sa tao na nakakakain ng mga ganito. So not only corals, not only green shells, but also our bentopelagic fishes natin nakakakain na rin ng microplastics. Nakaka-filter na rin ng microplastics. Ayan. Kung punta sa livers nila and sa muscular tissues ng isda, which we actually eat. Pero yung concept based naman sa mga studies, that the microplastics are concentrated sa gut area, sa stomach, and sa intestine. Which eventually napapalabas na nila. Pero meron nare-retain sa system, especially kung nakakapasok sa gills. Kasi matitira doon at sumasama na lang sa dugo. Na nare-retain sa muscular tissues. Okay. So, in summary, microplastics were already found sa Philippine marine waters na. Halos lahat ng study sites na kinuhanan namin ng water samples has presence of microplastics. Surprisingly, Manila Bay has a low microplastic count as compared to other sites. Yung yung pinakamataas pa nga is sa Canyon Strait, protected seashore din sa Cebu. Maybe it's because of hydrodynamics and other factors. Kasi malakas yung current dyan. And yung sampling site namin for Canyon Strait is located in the southernmost part of Cebu, where yung current is doon talaga napupunta. So, you know that it's like a basin there. Natatrap sila sa current yung mataas yung sa Canyon Strait. Next is the dispersion ng microplastics sa water column and the horizontal plane. Mas parang meaning that microplastics from the surface of the ocean down to 30 meters, walang pinagkaiba. It has the same distribution. And that is the factor to tell. The same with the horizontal plane. In the shoreline, and as far as 3 kilometers, equal din yung dispersion ng microplastics sa sampling study sites na kinuha na namin. And buoyancy of microplastics are affected by biofouling. Kasi nga, it's equal yung dispersion sa water column. So, it has a great possibility that buoyancy is a factor in its distribution. Yung tinatawag natin ditong biofouling, ito yung tumutubo na biological components dun sa particle ng ating microplastic. And ito yung sabi ni Doc kanina, na it could introduce a pathogen on the organism na naapektuhan ng microplastic na to. Pero there are still a lack of evidence, napakalimited pa ng evidence which could tell yung toxicity kung kailan mararamdaman ng organism yung pathogen na yun. Kasi nga, maliit na naman yung microplastic, pero nababioaccumulate siya dun sa organism. And it's one of the knowledge gap. And isa sa mga pinaka-interesting topics to research with sa health sector natin. Yeah. So next is that microplastics are already present in marine animals. So, based dun sa mga literatures that we have gathered, that most marine animals, especially commercially available marine organisms, marine animals are already affected by microplastics. So, what can we do? First is that from the DEMR's point of view, we have to review all solid waste management plans. And in order to deal with the current dilemma of solid waste in marine environment. Next is that we have to improve the management of our plastic wastes in the household level, sa LGU level mismo, with the help naman siguro sa atin sa DEMR. Next is that we have to inventory lahat ng land source outputs of this waste. Because di naman natin alam kung saan galing, especially kung nasa dagat ang sampling natin. Yan yung ano namin, because the ocean is very vast. And we don't know, it's being affected by hydrodynamic patterns and currents na hindi natin alam kung saan talaga magagaling basura. So, one of the best solutions to inventory yung land source outputs ng mga basura natin, saan ito nanggagaling. Sa river, sa bahay, natatapon sa kanal, pumunta sa river, eventually ends up in the ocean. Yan. So, isa ito sa mga one of the interesting topics natin to deal and to make a solution sa department. And in the LGUs surrounding our marine water bodies, mga dagat, we have to streamline all of the solid waste related policies because yung tinignan namin, there are contradicting policies sa kabilang LGU, iba? Ipasok nito sa kabila. Iba naman. And lastly, yung public awareness when it comes to solid waste management, impacts ng plastic pollution, not only in our marine environment, but in the environment as a whole, is very important. So, I think siguro, I also like to encourage EMP to delve with microplastics. Kasi isa to sa mga inaano namin sa ARDB that kung pwede yung mga microplastics will be by EMD when it comes to sa something ng tubig naman. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Isang makakalikasan ko sa inyo.
Thank you so much, Sir John, for that very informative discussion. Now, we will answer some questions that were sent to us. First question po is from Jericho Navasa. Enough po ba ang bilang scientific researcher sa Pilipinas na tumatakel sa plastic pollution at microplastic invasion sa marine environment?
Okay. Actually, to be honest, to be straightforward, napaka-limited ng research when it comes to microplastics, especially dito sa Pilipinas. this is one of the reasons one of the reasons why us from ERDB and CRDET push through to the conduct of this research. There are researches being conducted by different universities, pero they are concentrated on a specific area, or they are being concentrated on a specific animal. Like the one that I presented in kay Argamino, in Hanairo, of Lasal, they dealt with microplastics in feed shells in Bacoor Bay. So, dyan lang. They are concentrated lang dun. They are isolated. And there are also universities in Cebu conducting research in microplastics dun sa isda na pumapasok sa fishing ports sa Cebu lang. So, yan yung sa mga sa mga dilemma when it comes to microplastic research dito sa Pilipinas. Kasi limited lang. And using those researches, we still can conclude yung level of contamination of microplastics natin. That's why we conducted this research, nationwide research namin sa microplastics, para at least to give a baseline on the situation of our microplastic dilemma here in our country.
Any more questions po?
So, may isa pang question. Is Cagayan Valley coastal areas safe from microplastics or fibers?
Okay. So, siguro she's asking kung safe yung coastal areas nila sa microplastics and microfibers. Okay, so based on sa research, based on our results, sa kung areas natin, hindi natin masasabi na safe sila. Because yan nga, the distribution of microplastics are being affected by currents and other hydrodynamics sa dagat natin. So there is a probability na meron na rin microplastics kahit saan ka pumunta, especially dyan sa Cagayan Valley. Ano pa?
Ayun po.
So, meron pa pong mga humabol na questions. Last two questions po tayo before mag-end. From Jericho Navasca po uli. Ano po ang pwedeng i-substitute sa mga plastic materials na ginagamit ng mga tao ngayon? And paano po yung magagawa kung puro plastic na po ang madalas nating gamitin?
Okay. Good question. Actually, meron akong babasa, and there are also group of people or businessmen na gumagawa ng alternative packaging for food and other items which are utilizing eco-friendly materials like cassava o yung parang edible wrappers. These are good alternatives. Pero yung problema dito is mataas yung cost in the production of this materials. So siguro as of now, habang wala pa to or it's still not that prevalent, what we can do siguro to lessen our plastic impact is to consume less. Yung sinasabi na ng consume less, to just limit or simply bring a eco bag, a grocery, and just reuse other plastic items. If you just use it to wrap something, yeah.
I have another question po. How about po micropollution on fresh waters like lakes? Meron po bang enough studies para po dun?
Actually, there are also studies na nakakonduct dyan. Pero yan yung sabi ko, napaka-limited lang ng studies delving into microplastics. Especially yun sa mga land-based natin, sa mga lakes and rivers. Parang wala pa. Meron na, pero it's not that conclusive that we can na makakasabi tayo na we are highly contaminated with microplastics. So siguro it's a good ground for us para to start research and do research on microplastics para mas inclusive yung mga ano natin.
Ito sir, last na talaga. Is it 100 siguro sinasabi niya dito? Is it 100% safe to use bioplastic? And the difference between regular plastic and bioplastic daw po.
Okay. So yung mga bioplastics na tinatawag natin, yung parang napupudpud din, di ba? Parang yun din. Actually, these are also sources of the microfragments. Kasi still plastic pa rin naman sila. Pero also biodegradable. Depende din sa plastic material. Depende din sa kung ano yung pagkakagawa sa kanila. Pero most bioplastics that we have now are sources ng microfragments kasi mas napupudpud, mas mabilis sila mapudpud. And mas mabilis sila may microplastic. Hindi na natin sila nare-recycle. Hindi na natin sila nare-reuse.
Thank you again, Sir John, for answering all those questions and for the great presentation. At this point, we would like to virtually present to you our certificate of recognition. This certificate of recognition is given to Mr. Jan Alfonso P. Horbidalia for sharing his expertise in the webinar K-Onnect² Kalikasan at Kalusugan para sa Likas-Kayang Kinabukasan in celebration of World Environmental Health Day and the Trust of the Bureau, given this 28th day of September 2021, signed by Ms. Karen F. Pakpako, OIC Chief of EIDMB, and Engineer Bisminday Osorio, Assistant Director of Environmental Management Bureau.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Sir John.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, LDP.
So to formally end our webinar, may we invite the Assistant Director of the Environmental Management Bureau and the Chairperson of the EMB Gender and Development, Engineer Visminda A. Osorio.
Good morning. Naririnig niyo ako?
Yes
Yes
po.
Yeah, so magandang tanghali po sa ating lahat. And I know we have come to the end of our webinar, and of course, on behalf of the Environmental Management Bureau, I would like to thank all of the participants, both in Zoom and in our Facebook Live, for of course joining and tuning in and sharing your time for this webinar. So let me also thank our speakers, Dr. Jimen Luis Apostol of the Ateneo School of Medicine and Public Health, and also Mr. Jan Alfonso Horvadilla of the Ecosystems Research and Development Bureau of the DENR, And we have learned a lot from the topics that you have shared passionately with our participants. And of course, this webinar is again a reminder to all of us that we need to really rethink the way we live. And as our speakers have discussed, there are a lot of efforts and alternatives now to do things more sustainably and ensure that we are helping heal our environment and our planet as a whole. So, isa lang ang ating tirahan. We only live in one planet, and I hope that this is challenging to all of you who joined in this webinar, and to assess and internalize what you can do to protect our environment. I know all of you here agree that the environment plays a very crucial role in our health and in our existence. We need your help and your support, and protecting the environment will always be a shared responsibility. I hope we have inspired you to become better stewards and of the environment and part of as a game changer in this planet. So kanina nagkikinig ako sa mga tanong, but then alam natin na hindi kaagad over time or outright masagot yung inyong mga tanong, but then let me inform you that the DNR Secretary has just signed the implementation of the National Plan of Action for Marine Litter in the country. So some of your raised questions ay siguro matutugunan natin, hindi man siya outright na ma-address, but then take note that in that roadmap of our country roadmap for our National Plan of Action for Marine Litter in the country, may mga strategies tayo, and plano na ma-address natin yung ating microplastic, marine litter in such a way na hindi natin siya pwedeng one-shot deal, but then of course in a programmatic approach. So, or programmatic cluster and cross-cutting strategy. Kasi as I've said, ang ating problema sa environment ay hindi masosolve ng DENR yan. So talagang kinakailangan we will share our responsibility in such a way na ma-achieve natin yung purpose natin, which is of course yung issue sa plastic, ang issue sa solid waste, ito pa yung issue sa COVID-related hazardous waste. Ang lahat yan ay problema na nanggagaling din sa day-to-day activities ng tao. So with that, again, sana maintindihan natin through this webinar na ating meeting ay kailangan natin ng tulong-tulong. Kailangan natin ang isa't isa sa atin because of course, tayong lahat ay we are part of the environment. And we are part of the problem. So since we are part of the problem, kinakailangan din na maging bahagi din tayo sa solution na ma-address natin in such a way yung objective natin ay maproteksyonan natin ang ating environment. So with that, again, thank you for joining in this webinar, at marami pa kaming mga naka-line up na mga activities na wherein ma-update kayo, and at the same time lahat tayo ay ma-inform tayo doon sa role natin pagdating sa environmental protection. So kailangan namin ang inyong tulong, at naway patuloy tayong magkakaisa, magkapit-bisig, magtulungan para pangangalagaan natin ang ating kalikasan tungo sa Likas-Kayang Kinabukasan. Maraming salamat po at stay safe everyone. Good morning.
Thank you so much po, AD.
Maraming salamat po sa pagdalo ngayong umaga. So you may like us on Facebook at EMB Central Office Official or send us an email at records.co@emb.gov.ph.
Again, thank you so much for joining us and see you again on our next learning activities. Isang makakalikasang umaga po sa ating lahat.